Be good for us to get to know each other a little bit. So 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul talks about false teachers and apostles, right? He's talking about the Corinthians' temptations for other things than the true gospel, because they're dealing with these false teachers coming into Corinth, and the Corinthians are being tempted by what they're giving. The old saying goes, you can fool all the people some of the time and some of the people all of the time. Right? Some people are gullible naturally. You might know somebody in your life that you're like, yeah, I could tell them anything and they believe it. Like some people naturally are just gullible people. And then some people are gullible because of their desires and weaknesses. They're gullible because they want to believe something. And I want to believe that this is true because it'll make my life better. I'm struggling. I need to believe this is true. To be honest, that's how they get a lot of people to play the Powerball. Through weakness, right? Because, man, I need to win. I want to win. My life will be better if I win. But the truth is, they're just getting people that are gullible with the belief that, oh, if I just keep doing this, it's going to get better. Man, they were doing that to the Corinthians. It's these false teachers coming in and preying on the gullible people because they had desires to make their life better. The Corinthians really wanted to fit in. They wanted to be cool with the times of their society. That happens here in America. Everybody wants to fit in, to be part of what's going on. Instead of wanting to be like God, they wanted to emulate the society that was around them. Man, what's cool? What's going on? Like that happens today. You go to the store. Oh, thanks. You go to the store and what do they try to do? They try to sell you what's popular. They have ads. They have like all these things that are trying to get you to see what's popular so that you'll go after it. So in chapter 11, Paul questions them and he's kind of giving it to them for being so gullible. Man, how are you falling for these false teachers? There's false teachers going around and they're falling for it because they're offering something new, something different. It's hip, it's in. They didn't have TikTok back then, but these people going around were probably similar to TikTok influencers. People wanted to be like them. Man, did you see this guy? He was teaching and he had these people wanting him. These people just were crowding around this guy. I just wanted to be part of it. They wanted to emulate them because they were popular. That happens today, right? You go on TikTok and you want to emulate what's popular. You see these things going on. You're like, man, I want to do that. I want to be that. Like, how many things on TikTok over the years have been completely ridiculous, but they explode? The dances, the dangerous challenges people are willing to do because it's the in thing. Remember the Tide Pod challenge? That was the stupidest thing. Like kids eating Tide Pods because that's what everybody else was doing. You're like, why would you do that? Well, it's because they wanted to fit in. A guy, I don't know if you guys saw the news this week, but there was that art piece of a banana taped to a wall, and it didn't really make sense. So all it was a regular banana, and this guy, he wanted to prove how ridiculous art was. His idea was, okay, I'm just going to create this stupid piece of art, and people will want it because of how ridiculous it is. And it worked. So what he did is he took a regular piece of duct tape and a banana and taped it to the wall and left it there. And people walked in, they were like, this is ridiculous. What is this thing? But because it was so ridiculous, it went viral to the point where that same piece of art sold for $6 million this week. The best part is they had to re-tape the banana because the banana went bad. So they bought the banana for 30 cents yesterday morning and they auctioned off for $6 million. But it was to prove a point that just because something is popular, people want it. It was a 30-cent banana and a 10-cent piece of tape. But people want it because, wow, look, everybody wants that thing. Everybody thinks that's cool. It went viral. And this is what was happening in Corinth. Paul's like, these people are going after the things not that are true, not the true gospel. They're going after the things that are popular because that's what everybody else wants to do. So let's jump into chapter 11. We're going to see this going on. So verse 1, it says, I hope you will put up with a little of my foolishness, but you are already doing that. Paul hoped that the Corinthians themselves would realize how empty the teachings of the false apostles was. But since they didn't, he felt he needed to defend his credentials. I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. I promised you to one husband, to Christ, so that I might present you as a pure virgin to him. Paul didn't want to be embarrassed on the day of the great wedding feast of the Lamb, but I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. He's just talking about Eve. How is Eve attacked? Satan attacked what Eve thought about God, her mind. Spiritual warfare begins with our minds. It's not with our actions. It starts with the mind. Just attacked. Your thoughts are being attacked. The way you're thinking. Satan goes after the mind because what happens is your actions follow that. After your thoughts are won over, your actions will follow, moving you away from devotion to Jesus. That's what he's saying. It's like, man, your mind is being deceived. You're believing these things, so then your actions will follow. An example of that is when people commit adultery. It doesn't usually start with actions. It's not like, oh, I just happened to be there and that happened. Like, no, it starts with the mind. Your marriage, man, in your mind, oh, I don't know. Like, the grass is just greener. My marriage isn't well. It starts with your mind getting you into a place where then your actions will follow that because that's the place that your mind is in. And that's what he's saying about Eve. He's like, man, Eve was being deceived in her mind, so then the actions followed that. And that was what was happening here in Corinth. He's like, these people will start attacking your mind. Man, I want to know what's in. I want to be part of the popular group. And then their actions were pulling away from the truth of Jesus and following what was popular, not what was true. So it's the battle of the mind. Are you following the Lord in your mind, or are you being deceived by Satan so that your mind can be twisted so that your actions follow stuff that isn't true? That's happened here in America. American churches, all these thoughts, these ideas people are having, where things are entering the church that aren't true, but Satan's attacking people's minds. Well, you know, if God is all good, then he should be accepting of these things. And we're moving away from the true gospel and starting to just move over to these attacks from Satan where the mind is being distorted. So he's like, man, you have to just follow the Lord. Stop being deceived and just follow what is true. Verse 4 goes on to say, for if someone comes to you and preaches a Jesus other than the Jesus we preached, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it easily enough. But I do not think I am in the least inferior to those super apostles. I may not be a trained speaker, but I do have knowledge. We have made this perfectly clear to you in every way. So there's troublemakers among the Corinthian Christians. They're stirring up contention against Paul, right? But they're not only attacking Paul, they're also attacking Jesus by preaching another Jesus. He's talking about this other Jesus. Who is the other Jesus? Right? So because of the way that these Corinthian Christians despise Paul's image, they are attacking his weakness and they're attacking his unimpressive image. Like, man, you're going around dressed like that trying to teach people? The other Jesus, like, it was probably a Jesus that knew no weakness, persecution, humiliation, suffering, or death. Like, we can kind of paint that image and contrast it to what Paul was teaching. Paul was kind of this weak-looking guy who was humiliated, he was persecuted, and like, man, who wants to follow that? So you can picture this other Jesus was probably like the super Jesus of, man, this guy doesn't know any pain, he doesn't know any weakness, like he's just power and strength. But that wasn't the real Jesus, right? Another Jesus cannot save, and Paul's like, look, this Jesus that you guys are trying to follow, this one with this image, isn't it. Right? Because they were using their society and the things happening in their society to paint this picture of what Jesus should be. That happens in America, doesn't it? Trying to take the things in our society and painting Jesus to fit our society rather than taking Jesus and using Jesus to make our society like him. That doesn't happen. We're trying to paint Jesus into our society. Yeah, but this is America. This is 2,000 years after the Bible, and these are the things happening today. So that's what Jesus should look like, because this is our version of love and acceptance, and that's who Jesus should be. No. Jesus is who he is. He is the truth, and society should follow him, not the other way around. Similarly, Paul warned the Galatians about receiving another Jesus. Here we see in Galatians 1:8-9, it says, but even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let him be accursed. He's like, man, you cannot follow another Jesus. There's no other way. He's trying to make sure, look, there's one way and that's it. There's not another way. And honestly, we hear that today of people that are like, well, it doesn't really matter. If people have some sort of religion, that's good enough. There's one way. Like Paul's trying to make that clear. Like you shouldn't be going, well, at least they're following something. Well, if it's not Jesus, then they're following something that's fake. they're following something that's false. So just to say, well, I'm a religious person. If it's not meaning you're following Jesus, then that doesn't mean anything. The focus of the Christian life shouldn't be on having the coolest leaders or the hippest church, but to do the work of God. And it's not about, I go to this church and there's like 10,000 people there, and the pastor, you should see, he goes to the gym and he's ripped. Like that image, that does happen within churches, even good churches. Like, that has nothing to do with whether or not somebody's teaching the word of the Lord, but there are a lot of churches where the pastors are like, man, those are good-looking guys. And like, part of them getting that job is because they're good-looking guys and people want to follow them. But the truth is that you're not following that person, you're following the Lord. That's why some of us at Calvary Chapel, we don't go to the gym. We're just trying to teach the Bible. Yeah, Calvary Chapel. That's why we have donuts after the service. All right. It's not about the image. It's about the Lord. We say that so that we can eat donuts. So verse 7, was it a sin for me to lower myself in order to elevate you by preaching the gospel of God to you free of charge? Man, this is a very interesting verse talking about teaching free of charge. In the Corinthian culture and Greek culture, you judge the worth of a speaker by how much they charged. And if they charged more, if somebody spoke for free, they were judged as cheap and worthless. Man, that guy speaks for nothing. Why would I want to listen to him? So just so you guys don't get the wrong idea, you'll be charged $20 on the way out. I don't want you to get the idea that I'm cheap and worthless. But that idea that because somebody charged more, that didn't mean it was true that they were a better speaker. It just means they charged more. We can't judge how good somebody is based on how much they charge, right? For example, Taylor Swift. She charges like $1,200. She's not that good. Amen. We see that. We see people in our society today paying outrageous amounts of money to see somebody. Why? Because that person's that good? No, generally it's because of hype. Man, everybody wants to see them. That's why Taylor Swift is $1,200, because you're fighting a bunch of other people willing to pay the same price. But it doesn't mean that somebody's that good. It just means that everybody else is willing to pay the same amount because they think that's the in thing to do. It doesn't actually equate. So Paul's like, just because I'm not charging anything does not mean that I'm not worth listening to. And just because somebody else is charging a lot to listen to doesn't mean that they're worth more. You see all these conferences in America and it's like, oh, you can attend this seminar and you'll become a lot smarter and it's only $3,000. Wow, if it's $3,000, you must learn a lot. I know they just charge $3,000 to collect your money. Just because somebody is free does not mean that it's cheaper. And that's what Paul's trying to get. Like, stop trying to go after these flashy things because they're charging more. They're just ripping you off. They're scamming people. And then today, at that time too, they also had sponsors and that would follow them around. These speakers would have sponsors and they would speak about the things that the sponsors wanted to hear. That sounds similar today, doesn't it? People have sponsors. We have advertisement. The entertainment industry is all about sponsorships. They go and they say the things that they want to say that aren't going to offend the sponsors, the people that are promoting them, giving them money. And it was kind of the same thing. They had to say what they were going to say back then that would make the sponsors happy. Today, there's a lot of altering of messages that, oh man, if you say the wrong thing, you're going to offend people and then something's going to go wrong. I don't know if you guys saw the ad that Jaguar put out this week. So Jaguar, the car company, rebranded themselves and they hired this diversity guy to be the head of their advertising department, and they lost a ton of customers this week. They put out this advertisement that was just, it was mostly guys dressed as women and they never showed a car in the entire commercial. Like, there wasn't a car. The people are commenting like, are you guys still a car company? It was very strange, but what happened is they turned a ton of people off from their company because they felt like they needed to go this direction. They weren't worried about appeasing their sponsors. They were just trying to make a certain group happy. And in the end, they ruined a large part of their company. people trying to appease sponsors. In our world, you're trying to appease a certain group of people or certain groups of people. And you see it with every company. You watch TV and you watch advertisements, and they're all like directed at certain people depending on what kind of product it is. Well, like football. If you watch a football game, you notice there's like mostly just men commercials on. Like, oh, go buy this new F-150 truck. And it's like they're directing it at certain people. So here Paul's like, man, this message is being directed towards certain people that are gullible. And that's kind of where he was at. Like, they're attacking gullible people willing to go after this because they're weak. But Paul didn't want to be misunderstood. He could have been paid, right? Jesus said that it was okay for those to be paid that are teaching the gospel, but he chose to earn his own money to support his ministry. It's called being bivocational. Across the world, even today, there's a lot of pastors that are bivocational. They have a job and they teach for free because they don't want somebody to say, hey, you're doing this for the wrong reasons. The only reason you're a pastor is to collect the money, right? Paul didn't want people to be able to say that. He's like, I'm not collecting anything. So even though there's nothing wrong with it, Paul was being judged for it. So it's important to understand we can't judge the base of a message based on how much it costs. And in a church, we can't judge, well, is that speaker good? He doesn't have that many people here. He doesn't have 10,000 people in his church. What does that matter? Like, if he's teaching the Bible, he's teaching the Bible. So Paul goes on to say this really ironic sentence. He says, did I commit sin? So the Corinthian Christians who despised Paul were so worldly in their thinking that they actually thought that Paul might be in sin because he preached the gospel of the Lord for free. Like, isn't that ironic? Like, he's doing it for free because he understands the gift of the gospel. And he's like, we don't need to charge for this, but they thought he was living in sin by not charging. Like, man, who are you to teach for free? Not only was he teaching for free, but he was also being supported by other churches outside of Corinth. He says this in verse 8. He says, I robbed other churches by receiving support from them so as to serve you. And when I was with you and needed something, I was not a burden to anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied what I needed. I have kept myself from being a burden to you in any way and will continue to do so. As surely as the truth of Christ is in me, nobody in the regions of Achaia will stop this boasting of mine. Why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do. And I will keep on doing what I am doing in order to cut the ground from under those who want an opportunity to be considered equal with us in the things they boast about. He used that first word as kind of harsh. He says, I robbed other churches by receiving support. He didn't really rob them. What he's saying is that he took support from these other churches in the other areas, and then he was going away from those areas to teach here in Corinth. So he's like, man, I'm taking their money, but I'm teaching here in Corinth, because he didn't want the people in Corinth to be able to say, hey, you're just using us for money. So why did Paul do it this way? Why was he wanting to teach for free? Why was he not just wanting to do what the other teachers were doing? Partly was because of the culture that existed in Corinth. It was a very cosmopolitan atmosphere, very hip, very eclectic. And he didn't want his message to blend in with everything else cultural going on there. He wanted to stand out. He wanted to make sure, okay, what I'm teaching needs to be different because I don't want it to fall in line with these people that aren't teaching the truth. To stand out. He was okay standing out. Rather than being flashy, he tried to be as basic as possible. Right? Because he knew the gospel didn't need anything added to it to make it magnificent. He didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to wear a certain jacket. He didn't have to scream when he taught. He was like, I'm just teaching the gospel, and it's going to be fairly boring sounding, but he's like, there's nothing that needs to be added. The gospel is magnificent in itself. Yet here comes these other guys who are attacking Paul for doing just that. They were like, man, this message shouldn't be listened to because it doesn't fit in with the way things are done around here. They were complaining that Paul didn't fit in with their culture. How are you guys going to listen to that? Like, that guy doesn't even understand our culture. What he's doing is totally bizarre. Paul's like, that's the point. I'm trying to stand out because you guys are teaching the wrong thing. It's funny, by now, like, you start reading verse 13, and it seems like Paul's had enough of these people. Like, he's tried to be patient with them and like, okay, guys, look, this is where I'm coming from. Like, can we get on the same page? But at this point, he's like, look, I've had enough. And he kind of lets into them. Verse 13, he says, for such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, masquerading as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising then, if his servants masquerade as servants of righteousness, their end will be what their actions deserve. Kind of harsh. He's being real. Like, look, you guys are following these people that you think, oh, they're just so wonderful. It's like, man, they're masquerading like Satan as an angel of light, but there's deceit going on behind the curtain. This sounds like America, right? Like, this sounds like the people that people in America worship, that, man, I just want to be like those celebrities. I want to be like those people. And then you see what's going on in the background, and they're masquerading as like they have everything going on and they know everything. And then you see what's going on behind the curtain. You're like, I would never want to be like them. I don't ever want to do the things they're doing. So he's like, man, these people might be looking good, but the truth is this message they're teaching is completely false. So let's break this down, because Paul calls them three different things. First, he calls them false apostles. He's saying, look, they don't have the authority to be an apostle. There's no part of them that's an apostle. You can figure out who a false teacher is when they start running down other Christian teachers. I mean, if you have a Christian teacher on a stage and all he's doing is talking about how bad other Christian teachers are they a false apostle? Like, are they actually working for the Lord, or are they just working for themselves? And then he goes on to call them deceitful workers. Their motives, this goes along with that first part, their motives are self-seeking. They're not following the Lord, they're following their own interests. They sought authority in order to take advantage and take money from the people. And he's like, you guys are thinking because they're charging more that they're better. He's like, they're just taking advantage of you. They're self-seeking. They didn't have the good of the people in mind, but their own. And you can spot a deceitful worker by getting a read on their motivations. What are their motivations? If somebody's going and they have one of those seminars and it's $3,000, are they charging $3,000 because it helps you that it's $3,000 and they're offering you all this stuff? Or are you going to the seminar and it's like, they just took my money. Like I got nothing out of this other than just some advice. That happens. Like, the word consultant always makes me a little uneasy. Like, what is a consultant? Like, you're paying them for words? Like, consultation can be good if they're actually adding some value to your life. But if they're just taking money and giving you stuff that doesn't really mean anything, then they're just worried about themselves, self-seeking. So this also speaks to the fruit. If the result of a ministry is causing division, purposefully causing a divided body of Christ, then that's something to look out for. Are they being deceitful by dividing people? Or is their ministry about bringing people together? And that's what Paul was seeing here in Corinth. These false teachers, they were dividing people and trying to bring them, I'm the only person that can teach this message. They were like making them about themselves and then dividing the Christians by saying, hey, don't go listen to this guy. This guy's got no idea. He's not me. He doesn't know my ministry. He doesn't know what I'm teaching. They were dividing the people. So if you go to a church that tells you, hey, don't go to anywhere else. This is the only... There are a lot of good churches out there that are teaching the gospel. There's nothing wrong with going and learning the gospel from somebody else. Do not let somebody divide you from everybody else by saying, hey, this is the only place. There are a lot of churches that I probably wouldn't recommend going to, but if you're going to a church that's teaching the Bible, teaching the gospel, then you shouldn't be divided. Like, our job as Christians is to bring the body of Christ together, being totally fine. Hey, if you want to go have a bunch of friends from other churches, that's wonderful. I have a ton of friends that go to different churches. I don't try to hey, you got to come to our church. It's great if they want to come to our church. I like our church. I'm glad if they do, but if they're getting fed somewhere else, that's fine. It's not about division. We shouldn't be trying to push people away. And that happens. Like, people cause division by, hey, you can't be friends with that person because that's, they believe something slightly different than you. That's not to say that division won't happen, right? It does happen. It happens in a lot of churches. There's division among people. Why? Because people are putting eyes on man instead of the Lord. Worried about themselves, worried about what they're saying. And then third, he calls them out for masquerading as apostles of Christ. The word masquerade means to transfigure or disguise. Right? Sometimes we masquerade, right? once a year in America, there's masquerading. People might wear a Halloween mask, right? On the outside, they might look like one thing, but on the inside, they're another thing. So in this case, it's like reverse Halloween. On the outside, these men looked like real apostles, but on the inside, they weren't actually serving the Lord. It's like, man, they're masquerading as people that are teaching the real thing. And then he goes on to say, even as Satan may appear as an angel of light, so false apostles may have a good appearance. Saying, look, Satan did that. He looked good. He had this angel of light appearance to him, but there was deceit and untruth going on behind that light. Paul is showing the Corinthian Christians how foolish it is to rely on image and outward appearance. Man, the gospel goes a lot further than image and outward appearance. Image and outward appearance is okay. We should have a good image. As we're following the Lord, we should be worried about our image, but we shouldn't rely strictly on image and outward appearance, right? Because you might have somebody that looks good. They say all the right stuff, but what are their motivations? So the final thing to look at then is, what is the message that they're teaching? Test it to see if it reflects the true gospel of Jesus. How do you do that? 1 John 4, 1 through 3 says, Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. Because many false prophets have gone out into the world. This is how you can recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, but every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard is coming, and even now is already in the world. So, do they support biblical Christianity? What are their motives and results of their ministry? And does the message conform to the true gospel of Jesus? And you could go see somebody at any church across the country that they look up there and they go, man, they're a really good speaker. You know where we have really good speakers? Politics. Go look at politics. The politicians we have in America, almost all of them are really good speakers. They all have that's how they get into their position. They can stand in front of a crowd and they can tell people everything they want to hear, and they have all these big words. I went to Cornell, I went to Harvard, they all have these big words. But what does that mean? Does that mean because they're a good speaker, because they have all of the right words, that everything they say is true and everything they say is really about putting you first? If we did a poll in here right now, I guarantee that 90% of the room, if I said, hey, who believes that politicians all have your best interest in mind? Yeah, probably nobody. The truth is, they all make, millions of dollars on a salary that doesn't make sense. And it's not one side or the other. It's all of them. And you go, well, but they're good speakers. Yeah, they'll tell you what you want to hear. And that's what Paul's saying here in Corinth. He's like, these people will tell you all what you want to hear. They have the degree, they have the words, they can say all this stuff. And you're going to go, man, you should listen to that guy. He's so smart. Yeah, but what is the motive? What is happening behind that? Because if it was only about outward appearance and the things going on the outside, the good words, the knowledge, then we'd all sit here and go, yeah, every politician is right. Because we go, they have all the right words and knowledge. But truth is, it's all about motivation. What is the motivation behind the message? Is it true? Are they teaching the true gospel of Jesus? Their words might be big and not make sense, but are they teaching the truth? I actually get discouraged when I hear somebody preaching and they're using big words, because I have to look up most of the words while they're teaching. And I'm like, it's hard to follow if they're telling the truth because I don't even know what words they're using. It's better just to use regular words so that everybody can understand. So that's why I use small words, mostly because I only know small words. But I don't want to confuse you guys. I was homeschooled, okay? I did go to college and I did learn you can graduate without using big words. All right. So if you ever find yourself questioning a pastor or a teacher, you can make the judgment on that person based on these criteria. What is their motivation? Are they teaching the truth? Now, Paul's comparing himself to these false apostles, right? He's saying these things. He's like, they have the best references. They have the best credentials. They're knowledgeable. They have big words. They have the best recommendations. But he's like, look, here's the problem. They're not giving their lives fully to the Lord. All of this other stuff doesn't matter. If they're not teaching the true gospel, who cares if they went to Harvard? It's a repeated theme throughout this book that outward signs of success do not equal true spiritual authority or the true work of God's Spirit in the heart of men. Man, it doesn't matter what somebody might look like they're doing. If they're not actually living their life for the Lord, then it's all for nothing. 16, I repeat, let no one take me for a fool, but if you do, then receive me just as you would a fool, so that I may do a little boasting. In this self-confident boasting, I am not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool. Since many are boasting in the way the world does, I too will boast. Man, Paul isn't one to boast about what he's done. He's not out there to say, look at me, I've done all this great stuff. I'm following the Lord better than all of you. He doesn't want to boast, but here he has to try to show them, look, this is what the true gospel and truly what following the Lord looks like. In fact, boasting about our accomplishments, like Paul's like warning against this. He's like, do not boast, because boasting about our accomplishments can lead to pride. You know how many people I brought to the Lord? You didn't bring any to the Lord. God transformed their heart. Like, you just happened to be on the stage teaching when their heart was transformed. Like, we cannot take the credit for the things that God is doing. And Paul's like, this isn't about boasting about what you've done, right? Focusing on yourself instead of the Lord leads to pride problems. Yeah, but you know what would happen if I left this place? If I wasn't teaching this morning, would you guys come back? Like, yeah, you would, because it's not about us. And Jeremiah the prophet says in Jeremiah 9, let not the wise man boast of his wisdom, or the strong man boast of his strength, or the rich man boast of his riches. But let him who boasts boast about this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord, who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth. For in these I delight, declares the Lord. Boasting's great. You know who you're supposed to boast for? The Lord. Man, he is wonderful. He does it's all because of him. It's totally fine to boast if you're boasting about God. But the problem is, in Corinth, these Corinthians, they were so enamored with people who were boasting about themselves, weren't giving the true gospel. They were talking about how great they were and the things that they were doing. And Paul's like, that's not the gospel. It has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do about God. Paul will act like a fool and lower himself to their level so not to endanger turning them away from the gospel. So Paul he starts boasting because he's like, okay, I'm going to meet you at your level. I'll start boasting if you're going to boast about these people. But he's starting to boast about the Lord. So as we get into this, it takes this surprising turn. Verse 19, you gladly put up with fools since you are so wise. In fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you or exploits you or takes advantage of you or pushes himself forward or slaps you in the face. To my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that. He's talking about these false teachers. They were willing to take advantage of anybody that was willing to be exploited. So Paul is saying too weak sarcastically, too weak to take advantage of them. He didn't want to take advantage of them. The words used here, take advantage, are the words used to describe how an animal devours its prey and paint the picture of a hunter looking to bait his prey. Man, a hunter going out and just looking for people to attack, to prey on. The false apostles were looking for people who were gullible enough to believe anything they said, trying to find people willing to just do whatever. Like I talked about politicians. Politicians do the same thing. What kind of people, like, they don't want people that are willing to push back. They want people willing to believe anything that they say. It's the same thing, man. False apostles are just going around. If you were somebody that had questions for them or said, is this the real gospel? They'd probably just walk away from you because they were looking for people that they could make believe them. So we got to stop being impressed by powerful people, right? People who push themselves. Man, it's about me. Look how great of a speaker I am. And start looking for somebody that's going to teach about how great God is, boasting about the Lord and not what they say about themselves. So here's Paul's boast. This is what Paul says. This is how we should be boasting. What anyone else dares to boast about, I am speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast about. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. I mean, he's boasting about the Lord. But he starts by saying, are they Hebrews? So am I. Paul's human ancestry was more than enough to qualify him as an apostle. Right? Not only was he from the seed of Abraham, he was also of the Israelites. Not only was he of the Israelites, he was also of the Hebrews. Meaning he was a Jew of Judean descent, as opposed to Jews who were born from people coming from areas other than Judea. So Paul's got the background, like he's got the background to be an apostle. But he recognized that these people were also Jews. He recognized that they were also of that descent. Paul agrees with them on that. But as for whether they were servants of Christ, Paul doesn't necessarily agree with that at all. He's like, look, you might be of the right descent, you might be Jews, but he's like, what you're teaching isn't true. Look how he boasts in verse 23. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from the Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been naked and cold. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak? And I do not feel weak. Who is led into sin, and I do not inwardly burn. If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. Sounds like he has a fun life. A lot of us have like danger of from one thing. Like, if I lose my job, what's going to happen? It'd be bad enough to have one of these things. Like, in danger from rivers, that sounds scary. I don't know about you guys, but I don't love water. Like, being in danger in water. But he's like all over the place. He's like, man, I've been in danger all over the place. I'm still just going and serving the Lord. He's boasting about these things not because he wants to prove himself, not because he's boasting about, look what I've done for the Lord. But he's like, look, I'm going to have to prove myself, because that was their culture of these people in Corinth. When they had these people come in, these people would teach and they'd prove this is why I'm worth following. So Paul's like, look, if that's the culture, then I'm going to prove to you right now why I'm worth listening to. But what's funny is these things that he's boasting about, he's like, look, I'm boasting about the things that you're saying makes me weak. The fact that I went through all of these things. Man, he sure had some tough times. His opponents were saying that all of Paul's troubles showed that God couldn't be what he couldn't be in what he was doing. Man, if God was guiding you, then you wouldn't have all these troubles. The outward circumstances should be indicative of inward favor or disfavor towards God. That's what they were saying. Based on what your life looks on the outside, that's indicative of what God is doing. And obviously, Paul didn't have the favor of the Lord. Look what's happening in his life. But Paul saw the hard work as an honor to serve the Lord. Man, it's an honor that he got to do those things. He's like, man, I know I've gone through all this, but he's like, man, I get to serve the Lord. That God is bringing me through all of this. He considered himself an apostle because he was willing to serve the Lord tirelessly. It's like, my life isn't easy. This stuff, all these trials, I wouldn't wish these upon anybody, but he's like, I'm glad that these happened because it's just gotten me to serve the Lord even more. He said, I am a minister of Christ because I work harder than any of the other apostles for Jesus' sake. Paul said this more explicitly in 1 Corinthians 15. He said, I labored more abundantly than they all. He's just acknowledging that his life's been tough. Man, it hasn't been easy. But he's like, this is what makes me an apostle, is the fact that the Lord is using me despite all of these things that I've had to conquer. In contrast, the most eminent apostles saw being a minister of Christ as a matter of privilege. In their minds, the more a minister you were, the less you should have to work and the more others should serve you. That was in their mind of these other ministers in the area. They were like, look, if you're so prominent, then you shouldn't have to work really at all because other people will take care of you because that's how great you are. I was like, what is that? People shouldn't be serving you. You're serving the Lord. It's not about you. Man, I feel for Paul. I read this list of things that he's gone through, and he's just trying to get somebody to listen to him because he's like, man, I've endured all this stuff. I've gone through all this. I'm serving the Lord tirelessly, being willing to be thrown in prison for it. And he's like, now he's trying to prove himself. Like, to me, it's like tough to hear like that he had to prove himself to these people because like to them, he was weakness, not strength for having endured these things. Imagine going through what he went through and having these tough times and then just being questioned for it. Maybe you yourself, maybe you've gone through tough times. Maybe you've questioned, well, man, God, are you with me? Like, I'm facing all these things. Like, am I doing something wrong? Or is this a trial? Like, I'm sure Paul asked himself that question many times. Like, okay, God, what are you doing? Are you with me? Like, am I supposed to be doing this? Now, if you suffer because you have sinned, then those are just, you're getting the consequences of your actions. Like, there's two different things, right? If you're suffering because of sin, like, it's just your actions leading to the consequences. But other than that, if the Apostle Paul suffered such a hardship and then boasted about it, boasted about serving the Lord, man, God is so good even though all of this happened, then who are we to complain about our hardships? Right? Sometimes we complain about things that we caused. Man, my life is so tough. Well, what do you expect? Like, you live in sin? Like, that's what happens. Like, you see that in America, like, man, life is so tough having 5 kids. Well, you should have planned to have 5 kids then. Like if you didn't plan to have 5 kids, but now you have 5 kids and life is hard, like, were you planning? Like, man, sometimes things are just the consequences of our actions. I've got 2 kids, and honestly, I understand the consequence of my actions. I'm like, should have had less kids. No, I'm just kidding. We want more kids. That's where I want 4. She wants 3. We had them too close together. One's 2, one's 1. Now we're probably waiting 15 years to have another. But honestly, like, we can't question things when it comes to sin. Like, if you sin, like, there's consequences for your actions. But on the other end, if things are just happening, if you're like, man, I've been serving the Lord and my life is tough. All right, well, look what Paul went through, and he was still boasting about the Lord. Like, it just puts our things in perspective. Man, life is hard, but Paul was still serving the Lord, so I can too. Why can't I serve the Lord through hardship? Doesn't mean that what we're facing isn't real. And that's the important part, is making sure that it's not like, well, just because you're going through something tough, like, that doesn't matter. Like, no, it does matter. Like, the things that you're going through, those struggles, they're real. Like, they should be acknowledged as real. Life is hard sometimes. But it doesn't change the way that we should be giving the glory to the Lord. All right, God, my life is tough, and I'm acknowledging that it's tough, but I need you right now. And I'm going to worship you regardless, not just when things are good. And sometimes people only worship the Lord when things are bad. All right, God, my life is terrible, so now I need you. Like, no, it should be all the time. Are we giving God the glory when life is good? Lord, thank you so much for everything that you provided for me. And then when life is bad, God, I know you're going to pull me through. Like, I'm going to rely on you. Like, just giving God the glory all the time. That's what Paul was doing, just boasting about how good God was regardless. Why does this matter? Because it's not about us, right? It's about him. If it was about us, then you could say, well, I'm only going to glorify God when life is good. It's not about you. Like, it's not about your life being good. The single most important thing we can remember is that it's all about God. So our life is just secondary. Like, okay, God, regardless of what's going on with me, I'm going to serve you, and I know that you're going to pull me through. Man, this is the mistake of humanity in the era of Lucifer, right? Lucifer thought it was all about him. Humanity thinks it's all about us. You see these ads on TV. When was the last time you saw an advertisement that was talking about what you could do for somebody else? Hey, we're going to sell you this product that you can give away. No, it's all about, like, they're trying to sell you something that you want. And I need that. If I don't have that car, then I'm not going to be cool. I've never seen a car and said, man, I think somebody else will look really cool in that. like, that's not your first thought. You see a cool car and you picture yourself in it. Mark 10:45, Jesus said, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. Right? Even Jesus came to do the Father's will and to give the Father glory and to serve men. Even though they would spit on him and beat him and ridicule him and eventually reject and crucify him, it was all about the glory of the Father. It was not about him. Verse 31, the God and Father of the Lord Jesus, who is to be praised forever, knows that I am not lying. Paul knows that one day the truth will come out. He's like, look, you guys can ridicule me, you can call me weak, but he's like, I know at the end of all of this, the truth will come out, and the truth will prevail. What I'm doing will be proven to be right. Eventually, our true motives will be revealed, so why not serve now and ask God to purify our motives now? Right? Like, why are we, like, let's just serve the Lord now, regardless of what other people are saying, what other people are thinking. Other people might say, yeah, but like, you're like uncool. Like, you're so different than society, you're not going to fit in. That's okay. Like, God's going to tell you the truth. The truth is, if you're serving the Lord, then you're fitting in with the Lord, and eventually you'll get to see that. So Paul ends the chapter with a bit of biographical note here, verse 32. In Damascus, the governor under King Aretas had the city of the Damascenes guarded in order to arrest me. But I was lowered in a basket from a window in the wall and slipped through his hands. He's using this picture as the first kind of peril that happened while he was serving the Lord, right? Acts 9:23 through 25. He thinks way back to the beginning of this event, perhaps thinking that his escape from Damascus was his apprenticeship in persecution. He's like, man, I escaped from an early age, and that was like the beginning of my ministry. This is how my ministry began, and this is how it continues. Like, he's painting this picture of like, man, all the way back from the start, I've been being persecuted. It illustrates with power the contrast between Saul of Tarsus and Paul the Apostle, right? Same person, but constantly persecuted through his ministry. Saul of Tarsus traveled to Damascus full of man's power and authority, directed against God's people. He's got like, that's why Paul understands this. He understands that this picture of weakness that these people think is a bad thing, he knows it's a good thing because he had all of this power before as Saul of Tarsus. Like, he's like, man, I had the power. I had the authority. I understood. Like, he understood that this image of power is what people respected and wanted. But now he understands that serving the Lord is actually about weakness and serving others. Paul the Apostle left Damascus humbly in a basket. Man, is there anything more descriptive of weakness than being let down in a basket over a wall? Like, that's like, that picture is like of weakness. Like, okay, here, you can escape in this basket being like that's the picture of weakness. Can we think of anything more likely to rob a man of any sense of dignity than that? Like, just to escape like in a basket, like, here, go ahead and get it. Like, no, like, there's those things as a man that you're just like not willing to do. Usually, I'll be honest, that happens around Halloween when my wife's like, here, you're going to wear this. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm a man. Like, I'm not wearing that. And then somehow I end up wearing thing 2 for Halloween, and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, what kind of man am I? But like, there is this image of a man. You're like, you want to have your power and authority. Like, man, I don't want to look weak. Right? Paul's opponents would say the same thing about that this is an example of Paul's cowardice. Man, you were weak in that. You were willing to be let down in a basket. But Paul used it here as an illustration that from the very beginning, he was called to suffer for the Lord's sake. He's like, look, I didn't want to do that. I don't want to look weak. But he's like, that's what we're called to do. He's like, I'm called to just serve the Lord. And he's like, if that means I look weak, if that means that I don't have power and authority, he's like, that's fine because it's all the Lord's. The Lord has power and authority. And if we just look weak because we're serving other people, he's like, that's fine. I'll boast about that. I'll boast about being weak. But we should have power and authority using the word of the Lord because we know the power of the Lord. So we shouldn't be weak and be like, I don't know the answer. Yeah, we have the answer. And it's Jesus. He is the power and the authority. We're not called to just be weak, but Paul's like, I'm not going to sit here and argue and challenge you because I know the truth and I know that the power comes from the Lord. So I don't need to puff myself up and say, well, I'm all power. He's like, I'm nothing. I'm just a servant of God. But he's like, the power and authority is in the Lord. So don't go to an argument and say, well, God said that I'm weak. Like, you're not weak. But in your argument, you shouldn't be puffing your own chest to make it seem like you have all the answers because all the answers come from the Lord. So the conclusion, we often mistake power for blessing. Man, did you see that guy? He was so powerful. He had all the answers. When in reality, suffering should be more the norm for a Christian when walking with the Lord. Philippians 3 says, I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow to attain the resurrection from the dead. Man, suffering should be what life as a Christian looks like. We're not called to, hey, become a Christian and you can go stomp on people. No, like life is going to be challenging. There's going to be times in your life where you're uncomfortable. Man, I'm the only person in this group of people that doesn't fit in. Right? This is what the Corinthians were worried about. They were worried about their culture and, man, how do I fit in? You know, as a Christian in America, probably used to be that you could kind of fit the norm and just walk with society because America was a Christian nation. You know how hard it is to fit in with the Lord and fit in with the American culture these days? It's pretty tough. Because even if you call yourself a Christian, there's a lot of Christians that are just blending in with the culture of America, and they go to church on Sunday and they're kind of fitting in on like, no, we should be like Paul. We should be totally fine. Man, I'm going to be different. It's okay though. It's okay if people are going to say, man, you know, like you're not like everybody else. Like you don't have the same clothes on everybody else. Like, doesn't that make you feel weird? I don't know. I'm just serving the Lord. That's what Paul was doing. He didn't care that he wasn't fitting in. He doesn't care that he didn't look like he had money. It's fine. He's just serving the Lord. And then the second part, are you proud of the Lord? Matthew 10:32 says, whoever acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before men, I will disown him before my Father in heaven. Man, are we sometimes ashamed of those that suffer? And that guy, like you see that guy, like he had a sign and he was standing in the middle of those people and people were mocking him like, man, I wouldn't want to be him. Like, I watched a video the other day. This guy went out to a rally. I don't know. It was like I don't know if it was like a Planned Parenthood rally or it was just a bunch of people in the LGBTQ community, and they had this huge rally. And this guy went, and all he had was his Bible. And he's standing in the middle of all these people reading his Bible. He wasn't doing anything other than just praying for them. He wasn't like in their face, like, hey, like. He was just reading his Bible, and he's like, man, may the Lord bless you. And these people were mocking him and spitting on him, and he was on the ground, and they were like surrounding him and just insulting him. He was just reading his Bible. And you might say, wow, that guy was weak. Why didn't he stand up? And he should have punched one. Like, no, like he understands the power of the Lord that, man, I don't have to do anything. It's not about me. It's not about my power. It's like, I'm just serving God, and God's going to do what he's going to do. We can't be ashamed of serving the Lord, even if that means not fitting in. Even if that means that people around us might push us away. And I don't want to be around you. Like, you don't believe in all these things that society is doing, and you're kind of strange. Okay, well, I don't know what else to do. I'm just serving God. If you lose friends because they don't want to be around somebody serving the Lord, then you lose friends. Right? It'd be better to stand with the Lord and lose friends than to stand with your friends and lose God. So we can't be afraid of or ashamed of belonging to the Lord, right? Especially around those who openly mock him. Do we boast about him, right? Do we boast about how great God is? Or are we afraid to say the truth? In America, we seem to have trouble with telling the truth about the gospel because, honestly, it's offensive to some people. The true gospel, what the Lord really calls people to do, can be offensive to some people in our culture. Why? Because they're standing on the other side. They want anything to do with God. It's okay, then offend them. Not in a way that you're like, I'm going to push them away and tell them how. No, like just share the gospel. If they get offended by the gospel, then that's that's on them. But like we should be sharing the gospel and not being ashamed of sharing it. And then 3, don't let outward circumstances dictate whether you are following God's will. It's not about our life. Remember, it's an inward transformation. Our life following the Lord is about inward transformation, not the outward surroundings that matter. It's not about, we're not becoming Christians to try to look cool, like we're being transformed from the inside. We should be boasting about God's glory all the time, not just when it's going well for us. Paul is boasting even while being persecuted, even while being in jail, even while being stoned, like, all right, God, I know this is a test, but I know you're good all the time. Sometimes in our life, we're going through a lot, and we're like, man, I don't have anything to boast about. My life's not good. All right, God, I don't know what you're doing, but I know you're good all the time. And to people in America, that might seem really strange. You have absolutely nothing. You're struggling. Maybe you're losing your house. And you're like, yeah, but God is good. You know how strange it's going to be to people in America? Like, no, because why? Because we equate life being good to what we have. Well, what do you have? Do you have a lot of friends? Do you have a lot of stuff? Do you have a nice house? Do you have a nice car? What kind of car? You drive that car and you're saying God is good? Yeah, he is. Like that's what it should be all about. It doesn't matter. It's not about our circumstances, because one day we're going to be standing with the Lord, and this stuff that we have on earth that everybody thinks matters, and well, that is what success is. You should only be following the Lord if he's provided for it. No, because this stuff is all temporary. One day we're going to be standing with him, and nobody's going to think about, yeah, but if I had driven a cooler car while I was on earth, life would have been better. No, you're standing with the Lord. It's not about that car you drive. And it's just about following the Lord, boasting about him all the time. Don't be afraid to share the gospel regardless of what is happening in your life. If life isn't going well, you know how much better your testimony is? And if your life is not good and you're like, hey, I'm going to share the gospel with you. The Lord, I don't know what God's doing in my life. I don't have a ton, but I'm trusting in him. And your testimony is pretty good. The fact that you can say that God is faithful all the time, people are going to be like, man, why are you so happy? Why do you have joy? Why are you trusting in this God when he hasn't provided for you? And you know what you can say? He has provided for me. It might not look like it to you, but I know how much he's provided. And then if you have a lot because the Lord's blessed you with a lot, you have a testimony too. God is providing. This stuff doesn't matter. The stuff that I have, it's just stuff. I know the truth is that God provides. He's the only one providing. I'm capable of nothing. But what we have to do is remove ourselves from that situation. We haven't done anything. People like to say, well, yeah, I believe in God, but I've done all of this. The only way you were able to do all of that was by being provided the opportunity by the Lord. I don't know if I shared this last time I was here, but one thing that really changed my life was 2019. I was in a car accident that I really probably shouldn't have survived. It was a head-on crash that I broke a bunch of stuff. And I remember that day, after that, all right, God, if you're saving me, then that means there's something more for my life. And to this point now, I think about, okay, all of this stuff that I've been able to do, having kids, getting married, this was before that, all of this stuff that's happened, I could say, well, it's because I did some of this stuff. I proposed, I had kids, I've worked so that I can provide for them. Well, on that day, if the Lord didn't give me the opportunity to continue living, none of this would have happened. None of this stuff that I've done is credit to me. It's all credit to the Lord, because everything that we do is because of him. The ability to do stuff, as soon as that ability starts to get taken away, when that happened, they were telling me that there was a chance that I was going to lose my leg. And in that moment, you're like, what's a leg? But when you're faced with that reality of something might happen, you go, okay, this is only possible because of what God provided. And I was thinking through my head of, what are all the things that I'm not going to be able to do that I used to be able to do? And luckily, they were able to save my leg, but at that moment, I was like, okay, God, this is all of this stuff that I'm capable of doing I'm only capable of because you provided me the opportunity. So in your life, if you're like, man, I don't know, what is God doing? He's doing something through you. He's provided you a life of being capable to do whatever he's called you to do. And that's what Paul's saying is, man, I've suffered through all of this, but I know that God is the one pulling me through. He's like, I'm not boasting about myself, I'm boasting about him. So wherever you are in your life today, whatever God's got you in, maybe your life is great, maybe your life is tough, maybe you need prayer this morning, and you're like, I don't even know what God's doing. He's doing something. He's doing something, and we can all boast about him. So I'm going to pray. Ryan, you got one more song? And then if you need prayer, if you're like, man, I don't know where God's moving in my life, I'd love to pray with you after. I'll be in the back. Martin will be in the back. We'd love to pray with you. Just give you the opportunity to start boasting about the Lord, regardless of what you're going through. So Lord, we thank you. We thank you that we can boast about you, that regardless of our circumstances, regardless of our life, that we can know that you're the truth, that your gospel is the one that is real, that we don't have to chase after false Jesuses, that we don't have to chase after these false things in life that offer happiness. In the end, they're full of emptiness, Lord. We thank you for how much you care about each one of us, that as we serve you, you take care of us, Lord. That on the outside we might not have all the earthly possessions, that we might not have a life that would make other people jealous, but Lord, we get to follow you, so that should be enough. We thank you for your love. We thank you that when things don't seem great here, that they're always great because we're walking with you, Lord. So just pray that you would bless this congregation this morning, that you would love these people, that we would have hearts wanting to love you, Father, that we wouldn't let outside circumstances dictate our relationship with you. We should just be in love with you all the time. Lord, thank you for all the things that you provide. Thank you for how much you care.